Okay, so this is 5 for the check for understanding problems. So you should have already done these, and then you can follow along and check your answers. For this first question, we're going to write the negation of each statement. And part A says the measure of angle XYZ is less or is greater than 70 degrees. So we need to say the opposite of that. So we're going to say the measure of angle XYZ. Now, the opposite of greater than, it could be less than, it could also be equal to 70 degrees. Okay. Then part B says today is not Tuesday, so the negation of that statement would just be to say today is Tuesday. Take out the not. Okay, then number 2, write A the inverse and B the contrapositive of the statement. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So first, the inverse is just when you say it's basically negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion. So instead of saying if you do not, we're going to say if you do stand for something, this first statement says you will fall for anything, so we're going to say you will not fall for anything. So remember, the inverse is just negating the hypothesis and conclusion. So that was the inverse. Now we need the contrapositive. That's when we negate the hypothesis and conclusion and we switch them. So in this, we're going to switch it so it says if you will not fall for anything. So basically we're just switching the hypothesis and the conclusion from the inverse. If you will not fall for anything, then you do stand for something. That's the contrapositive. Okay, so remember, we have if-then statements. If P, then Q. The inverse says if not P, then not Q. If you remember from earlier in the notes. And then, so this is the inverse. And then the contrapositive says if not Q, then not P. So that's how you figure out which statements you're negating and if you need to switch them. You can always look back at the top of your notes too if you need help. Number 3, you want to prove each statement true. Write the first step of an indirect proof. Indirect proof. Remember, the first step of an indirect proof is to assume the opposite of what you want to prove. So the shoes cost no more than $20, so we're going to say assume the shoes cost more than $20. And then we would go from there and try to prove it. But we only have to write the first step. Then the measure of angle A is greater than the measure of angle B. So we're going to say assume the opposite. So the measure of angle A is less than or equal to the measure of angle B, because that would be the opposite of greater than. Okay, then number 4, identify the two statements that contradict each other. So this first one says FG is parallel to KL, FG is perpendicular to KL, and FG is congruent to KL. Well, two lines can't be parallel and perpendicular at the same time. So we're going to say statements 1 and 2 contradict each other. And then it also asks us to explain why. So we're going to say two lines cannot be parallel and perpendicular at the same time. Okay. And last but not least, number 5. Number 5 is a critical thinking question. You plan to write an indirect proof showing that angle X is an obtuse angle. So I'm just going to write that, underline that because I think that's important. In the first step, you assume that angle X is an acute angle. What have you overlooked? Well, obtuse, obtuse means greater than 90. Acute means less than 90. What we've overlooked is a right angle, which is exactly 90 degrees. So we're going to say X could be a right angle. Because we want all of the options that are opposite of what we're trying to prove. So like we're trying to prove it's obtuse. If we just assume it's acute, then we forgot to figure out that it's not a right angle to prove what we wanted. Okay, so now go ahead and do lesson 5.4 practice. If you have any questions, make sure you're asking. And